Many corporations have begun decorating their halls with motivational posters in hopes of boosting their employees' motivation to work more productively. Oh no, work productively. Oh, I assumed it would have been more. I hate these posters. They're like pictures of mountains that say like aspire to greatness, yada yada. Anyways, however, almost all employees at these corporations are already motivated to work productively. Well, that's exciting. So these corporations' use of motivational posters is unlikely to achieve its intended purpose. What are they talking about? It just said that almost all employees at these corporations are already motivated to work productively. If they're already motivated, or almost all of them, that means that maybe some are not, maybe, and therefore the ones that are not might benefit. So, all right. Could having posters also help those continue to have motivation, despite the fact that they already have motivation? Anyways, our job, whenever someone draws a conclusion, is to say, why doesn't this necessarily have to be true? And we know the last sentence is a conclusion because of the word so. So does two things. Most people know that it points forward to a conclusion. You don't know whether it's a main conclusion or an intermediate conclusion, but you know that that's a conclusion. But the thing that a lot of people don't know is that so is also going to point back to a premise. Okay, so when I see that word, I'm like, yeah, I know that's a conclusion, and I know that's got to be a premise. And the first sentence is definitely not the conclusion. It's just telling us what most corporations, or many corporations, are doing. So, yeah, anyways. Basically what we have is background information / premise, conclusion. This is the first sentence, right? The first sentence is a premise, basically. Premise, conclusion. And so we're trying to figure out, why doesn't the conclusion have to be true, given what was said? It doesn't seem like it has to be true. It could still be helpful because it might help those that are not yet motivated, and it could be helpful because it might help those who are motivated to be even more motivated, or at least to continue to be motivated. I don't think those posters work, but hey, our job isn't to help the conclusion. Our job is actually to tell it why it's not necessarily true. The reasoning in the argument is most vulnerable to criticism on the grounds that. Most vulnerable to criticism means that we're definitely looking at a flaw question. As I go through the answers, I'm going to ask myself, does this have to be true? No. What am I saying here? Is this happening? Does this describe exactly what's happening in the argument, and is that a problem? Answer choice A fails to consider whether corporations that do not currently use motivational posters. We do not care about corporations that do not currently use motivational posters because the conclusion was limited to, quote, these corporations, right? So the conclusion, or whoever made this conclusion, is focused solely on the corporations that have begun decorating their halls with motivational posters. So what is true about other corporations is totally irrelevant. So the fact that this argument fails to consider anything about them doesn't matter. It wouldn't be like, okay, whatever. They could be successful, they could be helpful there, they could not be helpful. So we really don't even need to finish reading this answer choice because the first part is horrible. In any case, B takes for granted that with respect to their employees' motivation to work productively, corporations that decorate their halls with motivational posters are representative of corporations in general. Actually, answer choice B is wrong for the same reason that A is wrong. Takes for granted means assumes, necessarily assumes. So does the argument assume that what is true of these corporations, the ones that we're talking about, is true of corporations in general? Well, the conclusion wasn't about corporations in general, it was just about these corporations. So again, if you went after this argument, or the person who's making this argument, you said, yeah, but you're assuming that what's true about them is true about corporations in general, this person would say, I don't care about corporations in general. Corporations in general are not what we're talking about right here. We're just talking about the ones that have started to decorate their halls with these stupid posters. Okay, so this is not an assumption that is being made, and it's not a problem in this argument. It could be a problem in another argument, right? If you had evidence about a company that was putting up posters and then you drew a conclusion about corporations in general, that's not a good argument. You can't draw conclusions about corporations in general when you only have evidence about a select few corporations, a select group of corporations. But in any case, answer choice C fails to consider that even if motivational posters do not have one particular beneficial effect for corporations, they may have similar effects that are equally beneficial. Nope, again, this is like failing to misunderstand the conclusion, right? The conclusion is, so, these corporations' use of motivational posters is unlikely to achieve its intended purpose. The conclusion wasn't, these posters are useless, these posters will not benefit anyone, these posters won't benefit the corporation in any way. It's just that for these particular corporations, these posters won't help them achieve their specific goal of increasing motivation. So when answer choice C says, hey, this argument is failing to consider that even if they don't have one particular beneficial effect, they might have others. So what if they have others? The conclusion was solely focused on whether or not it would have this one benefit, and they're saying it's unlikely to have that benefit. So the fact that it has other benefits doesn't affect that conclusion in any way. If you're tempted by A, B, or C, you misunderstood the conclusion. You basically thought the conclusion was saying a lot more than it says. Okay? So for answer choice C, by the way, when it starts out by saying fails to consider, yada yada, it is true. This argument did fail to consider this possibility. But it doesn't matter, because even though the argument failed to consider this possibility, it's not something that has any effect on the conclusion, so it's not a problem. And remember, I'm asking myself two questions. Is this answer describing something that's happening, and is that a problem? For answer choice C, yes, it's describing something that's happening, but no, that's not a problem. D, does not adequately address the possibility that employee productivity is strongly affected by factors other than employees' motivation to work productively. Okay. The argument does not adequately address the possibility that productivity is actually affected by things other than motivation. Productivity is affected by salary or peer pressure, not by motivation to work productively. Okay, let's assume this is true for a second. Let's assume that employee productivity is actually affected by some other things. Well, the conclusion, again, is focused on these corporations and saying that these posters are unlikely to achieve their intended purpose. And what was the intended purpose? The purpose was to boost their employees' motivation to work productively, not to actually boost productivity, right? So if you read this argument and you thought that the goal was to increase productivity, which it probably is, but they didn't say that. They said that their goal is just to boost their employees' motivation to work productively. So as long as you do that, even if productivity doesn't go up, you've still achieved your intended purpose. So when D starts talking about employee productivity, we're just like, doesn't matter. We don't care about actual productivity. We just care about whether or not these posters increased their employees' motivation to work productively. All right, so answers A, B, C, and D are all wrong because they're focusing on some other element that this conclusion and this argument is not really focusing on, not relevant. E, fails to consider that even if employees are already motivated to work productively, motivational posters may increase that motivation. That's one of the flaws that So I just predicted, right? Like, sure. Even if people are already motivated to work productively, the posters may increase that motivation or at least sustain it or something. Answer choice E says increase. The argument fails to consider that possibility, and if that were true, then the posters would actually achieve their intended purpose of boosting their employees' motivation. That's correct.